The moment everything shattered, Mark opened the door with his free hand, the other gripping a small velvet box and a bouquet of white roses, Lisa's favorite. He'd even remembered the exact necklace she'd shown him 3 months ago, the diamond pendant that was subtle and elegant, just like her. He was already picturing her smile, the way her eyes would light up, the way she'd lean into him with that warmth he'd grown to depend on over their 6 years together. But when he stepped into the loft, the air didn't feel warm. It was still, heavy, wrong. No music playing, no candles lit, not even the smell of her perfume. Lisa sat on the couch scrolling her phone, barefoot, wearing one of his old college hoodies, and she didn't even look up. "Hey," he said, trying to inject enthusiasm. "Happy anniversary!" Her thumb paused mid-scroll. She glanced up for a second, her expression flat and unreadable. Mark opened the door with his free hand, the other gripping a small velvet box and a bouquet of white roses, Lisa's favorite, the ones she said made her feel like snow in summer, pure and soft and out of place in the best way. He'd even remembered the exact necklace she'd shown him 3 months ago, the diamond pendant that was subtle and elegant, just like her. He was already picturing her smile, the way her eyes would light up, the way she'd lean into him with that warmth he'd grown to depend on over their 6 years together, 3 of them as husband and wife. But when he stepped into the loft, the air didn't feel warm. It was still, heavy, wrong. No music playing, no candles lit, not even the smell of her perfume drifting through the air like usual. Lisa sat on the couch scrolling her phone, barefoot, wearing one of his old college hoodies, and she didn't even look up when he entered. "Hey," Mark said, stepping in fully, trying to inject enthusiasm into the moment. "Happy anniversary!" Her thumb paused mid-scroll, and she glanced up for a second, her expression flat and unreadable. "We need a break." Mark blinked, the words not quite computing. "Wait, what?" He tried to laugh, searching for the joke, the punchline, some indication this was one of her playful tests, but the sound came out wrong, hollow and desperate. Lisa stood up without meeting his eyes, her movements mechanical and rehearsed. I don't think this is working anymore." She walked past him into the bedroom without another word, and the door closed with a soft click, like punctuation to a sentence he hadn't understood yet. There wasn't a fight, no revelation, no explosion of emotion, just those words, and the door shutting him out of his own life. Mark stood there holding roses and diamonds like an idiot, feeling the petals tremble in his grip. This night was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone, perhaps even the beginning of a new chapter involving children and deeper commitment. Instead, the loft they decorated together, the open brick walls, the concrete floors softened by too many rugs, the kitchen island she'd insisted needed marble even if it took a second mortgage, felt like someone else's place, like he'd walked into a version of his life where he wasn't welcome anymore. He set the flowers on the counter slowly, quietly, as if making noise might shatter what little remained. Then he placed the necklace box beside them, unopened, unwanted. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was there someone else? Was this stress talking? Was it something he'd done? Some accumulation of small failures he'd been too blind to notice? The scary part was he didn't know which question he feared more. Lisa didn't come out of the bedroom. He heard drawers opening, hangers sliding across the closet rod, but no crying, no yelling, just mechanical sounds, like she was packing for a trip he wasn't invited on. Mark sat down on the couch and stared at the blank television screen, feeling the silence press against his ears like deep water. That's when the ache kicked in. Not sharp, but slow and paralyzing, the kind that doesn't explode, but leaks into every corner of your chest until you can't remember what breathing freely felt like. Mark couldn't sit still in the apartment that no longer felt like home. The loft, their apartment, felt like a stage set after the actors had left. Her purse still on the hook, shoes still by the door, but none of it carried her presence anymore. Not the way she disappeared behind that bedroom door without a backward glance. He grabbed his jacket, left the necklace where it sat like an accusation, left the silence that was becoming unbearable, and just walked out into the night. The air hit his skin like a wake-up slap. Not cold, but honest, the way a city feels when you're no longer part of its rhythm. Streetlights buzzed overhead as he drifted down their block, hands buried deep in his coat pockets like he was trying to hold himself together from the inside. Couples passed him on the sidewalk, laughing, holding hands, some pausing under lamplight for kisses that belonged in novels. He hated how it made his chest tighten, how he envied them for something he thought he still had just hours ago. Across the street, a guy knelt on one knee with a tiny ring box, his girlfriend gasping and covering her mouth with both hands. The look on her face should have made Mark smile, but instead it made his throat burn. He used to picture Lisa's face like that, surprised, in love, vulnerable. Now all he could see was the moment she said, "We need a break," like she was requesting a menu change at lunch. He walked past the bakery she loved, the one with those lavender scones still visible in the window. She'd make him get up early on Sundays just to grab one before they sold out. He'd grumble playfully, and she'd laugh, and they'd always split it on the walk back home. He kept walking, no destination in mind, just the ache moving with him like a shadow, a low hum of confusion vibrating in every part of him. Had he missed signs? Did he get too comfortable? Was it the long hours working from home, the quiet dinners, the nights they both stared at their phones instead of each other? Mark stopped at a corner, waited for the walk signal, and caught his reflection in a cafe window across the street. He didn't look like someone who'd been abandoned. He looked like someone who hadn't caught up to it yet. He ended up on a bench near the park, where kids were still tossing a frisbee under floodlights, where a couple sat under a tree with their heads leaned together, whispering like the world didn't matter. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, palms over his mouth, and there were no tears, just this thick fog in his chest, like his heart was trying to speak but couldn't form the words. The worst part wasn't even that she wanted space. It was how she said it. Empty. No fight, no apology, no regret, just like a decision had already been made and he was the last one to find out. The longer he sat there watching strangers live their lives, the more he realized he wasn't just mourning her. He was mourning the man he was with her, the husband who thought he was enough. And tonight, that version of him got buried quietly under dim street lamps and passing strangers who would never know his name. Mark didn't go home that night, ending up crashed in his car parked under a flickering street lamp near the river trail. His neck hated him for it, and his spine was half locked when he finally pried himself upright the next morning, but he couldn't bring himself to return to that empty apartment, not yet. When he finally walked through the door mid-morning, Lisa was gone. Her scent lingered faintly like she'd sprayed something before leaving, like she wanted to erase any trace of the night before, but not completely. That was Lisa's style. She didn't just leave, she curated an absence. No note, no explanation, just a wide, echoing silence and a sink full of clean dishes. Mark collapsed on the couch and stared at the ceiling for hours, thoughts looping like static. Around lunchtime, his phone buzzed, and he ignored it at first, but then the screen lit up again with a notification that made his stomach tighten. Lisa just added 3 new photos. He clicked before he could stop himself. She was on a beach wearing a sundress he'd never seen before, hair wind-blown and golden, lips curved into that easy smile she used to reserve for their private moments. Only now it was public, perfectly filtered, beautifully lit, framed with friends he didn't recognize. "Living my best life," the caption read, and it hit harder than anything she'd said in person. Another photo showed her holding a cocktail, legs stretched out on a striped beach chair, laughing with some guy whose face was mostly turned away from the camera. The third showed her clinking glasses with women whose names he didn't know. His chest hollowed as he zoomed in, looking for clues. The ring was off. He hadn't noticed it first, but it was gone. Just an empty hand raised mid-toast with perfectly manicured fingers glinting in the sun. One comment burned itself into his memory. "You look so happy, babe." Lisa had liked it. That like, not the pictures or the caption or the whole new crew she'd found in less than 24 hours, that acknowledgement was what got him. She was leaning into it, letting people see this version of her, carefree, radiant, untethered with no sign of heartbreak, no trace of him. Mark didn't plan to reach out to Kelly, Lisa's closest friend, but he needed truth, something solid, because Lisa had left without a goodbye, and now he was watching her sip cocktails with strangers like they never existed. He sent a simple message. "Coffee?" She replied within 5 minutes. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at a small cafe 2 blocks from their old gym. Kelly wore a beige trench coat and red lipstick, that same unreadable expression she always carried when Lisa wasn't looking. "I need to know where she is, who she's with," Mark said quietly. Kelly leaned back, folding her arms. "She's with a guy named Gavin. He's rich, lives in Tampa, owns boats and fast cars, one of those too many watches, not enough shirts kind of guys. They met at some gallery event a few weeks ago." Mark's stomach twisted. So it wasn't about needing space. Kelly shook her head slowly. "No, Mark, it was about trade-ups. Lisa got bored. You were familiar, steady. Gavin is loud and shiny and different." Kelly poured the wine like she'd done it 100 times before. Casual, but precise. Her apartment was dimly lit, all warm shadows and mismatched lamps that cast soft halos across worn leather furniture. It didn't match her, not the version of her Mark had known through Lisa's lens. After the cafe conversation, she'd said, "If you don't want to go home to the silence, I've got Pinot and an old playlist that'll punch you in the ribs." He couldn't say no to that. Now here they were, sipping wine and quiet, surrounded by art books and vintage jazz humming low from a speaker near the window. "You know," Mark said, swirling the red liquid in his glass, "I never thought I'd be sitting in your apartment, drinking my way through heartbreak." Kelly smirked. "Yeah, I imagined this scenario differently, like you'd show up begging me to talk Lisa into forgiving you after some dumb man thing. Didn't expect to be the one saying she's trash and you deserve better." That pulled a soft laugh out of him, the first one in days. But it died quickly, because beneath the chuckle something sharp and awful was pressing its way to the surface. Mark stood and started pacing. "I keep seeing her face on that beach, laughing, not a single wrinkle of guilt, not even a shadow." Kelly didn't interrupt, just watched, sipping her wine. "Do you know what it feels like to be erased?" Mark continued, his voice rising slightly. "To come home ready to celebrate a life you thought was solid, only to realize you've been living in a draft version she was editing without your consent?" He turned to face her, and before he even realized it, his voice cracked. "I brought her a necklace." Kelly's lips parted like she might say something, but didn't. "I was going to ask if we could start trying for a kid," Mark said, his voice low now, tight. "I even had a stupid speech prepared about how it didn't matter how crazy our schedules got or how small the apartment felt. I thought we were there." He took a sharp sip of wine, tasted nothing. The pressure behind his ribs built until it snapped. Without thinking, he reached toward the glass table beside the couch and slammed his wine glass down too hard. It exploded in his hand, red wine bleeding across the table like a murder scene, tiny shards dancing in every direction. Silence fell heavy. Mark stood there, breath ragged, staring at the mess, blood beading on his palm where a sliver had caught skin. Kelly rose slowly and crossed to him with calm, deliberate steps. She didn't flinch, didn't scold, just gently took his hand, led him to the kitchen, and started rinsing it under cool water. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "It's just the part where the mask comes off." Mark looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, everything shifted. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the weeks of quiet agony that had gone unspoken, or maybe it was how Kelly looked at him right then, not like Lisa ever had, not even at the beginning. She wasn't evaluating, wasn't measuring what he could give her. She was seeing him raw, busted, grieving, still standing. And when she leaned in, when her lips brushed his, it wasn't gentle, it was desperate, like they were both clinging to the edge of something dangerous, something neither of them planned for but suddenly couldn't resist. The next morning should have felt wrong, but it didn't. Mark woke to the sound of a kettle whistling in the kitchen and sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor like it was trying to warm up all the cracked spaces in him. His head was heavy, but his body was still. No panic, no regret, just a quiet hum in his chest that felt dangerously close to peace. Kelly didn't say much. She placed a mug of black coffee beside him and went back to chopping something on a cutting board like this was normal, like they hadn't blurred a line last night that couldn't be unblurred. She wore one of his t-shirts. He didn't remember leaving it here. Maybe he never had. She caught him looking and smirked without turning around. You don't have to overthink it. I won't tattoo your name on my arm or buy matching pajamas. That made him laugh. Real, unfiltered laughter. And just like that, something shifted again. Mark stayed over again the next night, then again 2 nights after that. At first, it felt like a temporary arrangement, a safe house, but Kelly filled the silence without forcing conversation. She knew when to joke and when to leave space. She didn't ask how he was feeling every 5 minutes, she just existed near him, and slowly that existence became part of his routine. She started showing up at his apartment too, bringing groceries without asking, rearranging throw pillows, muttering about feng shui, fixing his shirt collar before he stepped out like it was muscle memory. One morning, Mark opened his fridge and found almond milk. Hers, not Lisa's. It hit him harder than expected because without warning, their lives had started to braid together in ways he couldn't track. He still caught himself reaching for old habits, texting Lisa when something funny happened before deleting the message. Still woke up thinking he heard her key in the door. But those moments came less often. And when they did, Kelly didn't try to erase them. She just sat close and handed him a glass or changed the song or muttered something sarcastic that pulled him back. They didn't talk about what this was, about what they were becoming, but sometimes while she was cooking barefoot or humming along to her tragic indie playlists, Mark would find himself just watching her, studying the way she cracked eggs one-handed or folded dish towels like it mattered. It was unnerving how naturally she fit into a space he thought Lisa had designed entirely for herself. And yet nothing about Kelly felt like a replacement. She wasn't Lisa, and didn't try to be. She didn't avoid his grief, but she didn't wallow in it either. She existed in the space between, a limbo of warmth and edge and brutal honesty. One evening she caught him staring again and raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about her or me?" Mark didn't answer, mostly because he wasn't sure, and maybe that was okay. Because in that strange quiet, with her feet in his lap and her head on the armrest, he realized something he hadn't dared to admit yet. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about filling a void. It was about finding stillness in someone who didn't ask him to be anything other than broken and real. And for now, that was enough. There was a morning, just one, that finally felt light. Mark was standing by the window holding a mug of coffee he didn't remember making, watching the city outside look the same. Gray skyline, joggers with earbuds, the occasional early bus wheezing down the street. But something inside him had shifted fundamentally. He hadn't dreamed about Lisa, not even a flicker. No beach photos in his head, no memory of her walking away, no echo of that cold, perfect, "we need a break." Just sleep. Deep, quiet sleep. He glanced back at the couch where Kelly lay twisted in a blanket, hair a mess, mouth slightly open in that completely unfiltered way only real people sleep. She stirred, stretched, and cracked one eye open. "You're staring again." "I'm observing," Mark replied, sipping his coffee. She yawned. "Same thing, Shakespeare." He smiled, but this time it wasn't forced. Later that afternoon at the grocery store, Mark caught himself reaching for Lisa's favorite snack, salted seaweed chips. He held the bag for half a second, then put it back and picked up Kelly's brand of coconut popcorn instead. That was the moment, the one he hadn't been looking for but found anyway, the moment he realized he wasn't haunted anymore. Lisa used to be the center of his thoughts, every decision orbiting her preferences, her moods, her silences. Even when she wasn't in the room, she controlled the atmosphere. But now his thoughts were his own. Kelly had this way of pulling him into the present. She never asked for promises or permanence. She called him out when he brooded too long, mocked his music taste, told him when his haircut made him look like a sad librarian, and then she'd kiss him mid-insult and laugh like nothing needed fixing. It was disarming, liberating even. One night they sat on his tiny balcony, knees touching under a thrifted quilt, watching the sky turn from gold to charcoal. Kelly pointed out constellations wrongly, Mark was sure, and said, "You know, if I were smart, I'd leave before this gets complicated." Mark looked at her. "Isn't it already?" She shrugged, taking a slow sip of wine. "A little, but not in a bad way." And that's when it hit him. He didn't want her to leave, not because he was afraid of being alone, but because something about her had started feeling like home. Not the curated Pinterest version Lisa tried to build, but a messy, lived-in kind of home, where mismatched mugs exist, and music plays too loud, and someone calls you out when you start slipping back into old sadness. Mark turned to her and said, "You know what the weirdest part is?" She arched an eyebrow. "Of all the weird things about you? I think I'm starting to forget what Lisa's voice sounds like." Kelly didn't say anything, just reached over and laced her fingers through his. And for the first time in what felt like years, Mark didn't feel like he was chasing closure. He felt like he was already standing in it. The ghost had finally left, not with drama or ceremony, but with the quiet replacement of old habits with new ones, with the simple act of choosing coconut popcorn over seaweed chips, with the sound of someone else's laughter becoming the soundtrack to his mornings. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that creeps in slow, with sunlight painting soft lines across the kitchen counter, the smell of butter sizzling in the pan, Kelly humming tunelessly as she flipped eggs in one of Mark's old college t-shirts. He was sitting at the table in pajama pants, wearing a smile he hadn't worn in years. Then there was a knock. Not urgent, not aggressive, just familiar. Kelly looked up, spatula paused midair. "Expecting someone?" Mark shook his head. When he opened the door, time rewound instantly. There she was, Lisa. Sun-kissed skin, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, a bag slung over one shoulder, hair lighter, attitude heavier. She stepped inside like she still owned the walls, like she hadn't burned the place down before boarding a plane to play house with someone shinier. She didn't say hi, just dropped her bag and scanned the room, eyes narrowing as they landed on the eggs and the woman cooking them. Kelly stood still, cool as ever, one hand on her hip, the other holding a spatula like a weapon she wouldn't mind using. "Morning," she said flatly. Lisa turned to Mark, her voice sharp. "What's she doing here?" Mark let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "She lives here now." Lisa blinked once, twice. "You're joking." Kelly dropped the spatula with a sizzle and stepped forward. "You should go." Lisa ignored her, stepping closer to Mark. "Mark, this is my place." "No," he said calmly, "it was our place. Then you bailed. You don't get to reclaim it like a lost suitcase." Her lip curled. This is your rebound plan?" Kelly let out a slow, dark chuckle. "Honey, if I were a plan, you'd be a regrettable prototype." "Lisa," Mark said, stepping between them, "what do you want?" She looked at him like he was supposed to already know, her voice dipping into a lower, practiced register, the one she used to use when she wanted to pull him back into her gravity. "You, Mark. I came back for us. I made a mistake." The words should have moved something in him, but they didn't. They floated, weightless, empty syllables that arrived a season too late. "You didn't make a mistake," Mark said. "You made a choice, over and over, and then you posted it on Instagram." She winced. Mark didn't stop. "You left. You humiliated me. You found someone richer, newer, louder, and when it didn't work out, you circled back like I'd just be waiting in neutral." Lisa stepped back, arms crossed defensively. "You sound bitter." "I was," Mark said, stepping forward, "but now I'm just done." Her eyes flicked toward Kelly. "So this is your level now?" Mark smiled, not because it was funny, but because the insult didn't sting. Kelly didn't just show up for the good parts. She saw the wreckage and didn't flinch. You only came back because your vacation ended. Lisa's posture faltered, just for a second, then the mask slipped back on. "I hope she's enough," she said coolly. "She is," Mark replied, "and the eggs are better too." Kelly tossed him a small smile behind her mug. Lisa stared at him one last time, her expression unreadable, maybe calculating, maybe unraveling, maybe finally realizing he was gone. She didn't say goodbye, just grabbed her bag and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft finality. Kelly poured more coffee. "So you're not into dramatic exits, I guess?" Mark exhaled. "Not anymore." And just like that, the air cleared. A storm had passed, and this time, he was still standing. Kelly didn't say anything that night. She cooked dinner like nothing had happened, the way she always did when things felt like they might fall apart. There was music playing, some moody instrumental piece Mark couldn't name. She poured wine, even asked how his day was, like Lisa hadn't just walked in like a ghost with an attitude. But Mark knew her too well now. The silence wasn't neutral, it was measured, loaded. They sat across from each other, the clink of forks on plates sounding louder than the jazz in the background. Finally she looked up, and there it was, that thing he hadn't seen from her yet, not since this strange bond started forming. Hesitation. "Do you love her still?" she asked, voice so quiet it barely reached him. Mark set his fork down, rubbed his hands together. "I don't even know who she is anymore." "That's not what I asked." He met her eyes. "No." She nodded slowly. "But part of you still wants her to want you." That landed harder than it should have, because she was right, not because he wanted Lisa back, but because there's something buried deep in us that begs to be chosen, even by those who don't deserve the privilege. "I don't trust that you're done," Kelly said, standing now, her fingers toying with the edge of the table, knuckles whitening slightly. "Not completely." "I told her to leave." "You told her to leave," Kelly echoed, stepping back, "but you didn't choose to stay." Mark stood, heart suddenly racing. "I'm right here." She shook her head, hair falling into her eyes. "You're halfway here. The rest of you is still looking at the door she used." That was when Mark realized what this was. Not an ultimatum, not a guilt trip. It was truth. Kelly wasn't begging for space in his life. She was drawing a line, soft but final. "You know I care about you," she said, "probably more than I should, but I won't be your emotional waiting room while you figure out if the past still owns you." Mark took a step forward. She didn't flinch, but she didn't soften either. "You don't have to say anything right now," she added, voice steadier but not cold. "But just know this weird, messy, surprising thing we've got, it doesn't survive in limbo." She grabbed her coat, her movements deliberate. "Make your move, Mark, or I'm gone." Then she walked out. No dramatics, no slammed door, just silence. And Mark stood there, in that same living room where Lisa had shattered everything just weeks ago, realizing something terrifying. This was the moment, the one that would define which version of himself he was going to keep living in. Not just who he loved, but who he wanted to become. The man still tied to the past, or the person who stood beside him when everything else broke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The apartment felt enormous and empty. His phone sat on the counter, silent. Outside, the city hummed with life. Cars passing, voices drifting up from the street, the world continuing regardless of his crisis. But inside this room, everything had stopped, waiting for him to decide. Waiting for him to choose not between two women, but between two versions of his future. And the weight of that choice pressed down on his chest like a physical thing. The next morning, Mark woke to silence. No clatter of pans, no soft footsteps across the hardwood, no humming off-key in the kitchen. Just that deep, unsettling quiet that used to haunt the walls when Lisa started pulling away. Only now the silence had a different weight, because this time it was his own doing. He made coffee like a robot, methodical and exact, but the ritual felt hollow. He sat at the table where Kelly had looked at him with that guarded hope and said, "Make your move," and he knew he couldn't wait for the pain to pass before acting. Healing didn't come wrapped in certainty. Sometimes you had to choose even when you were still bleeding. So he opened his laptop and typed fast, no hesitation, "Petition for divorce." It felt clinical, like a transaction, but as he filled out each field, something in him realigned. Address, date of marriage, grounds for divorce. He typed irreconcilable differences, though what he wanted to write was public betrayal, emotional abandonment, and a weaponized smile over rum cocktails. By noon, the papers were printed, signed, sealed. Mark slid them into an envelope and stared at his name scrawled across the top, Marcus Keene. He used to see that name and think of his marriage. Now it just felt like his again. When he walked into the clerk's office, he felt still, not powerful, not angry, just certain. The woman behind the desk took the envelope without comment, stamped the date, and handed him a receipt. That was it. 6 years dissolved with a stamp and a stapler. Outside, the sky was pale and wide, the wind pushing at his coat like it was nudging him forward, and for once, he didn't resist. He stopped by Kelly's apartment that evening. She opened the door barefoot, no makeup, wearing an old hoodie that had clearly seen better days. Her face was unreadable, prepared for anything. Mark held up the receipt. She took it, glanced down, then looked back at him. "You filed." "I did." She didn't move, didn't rush into his arms like a movie scene, just studied him quietly. "I'm not filing papers for us," Mark added. "There's nothing neat about this, no boxes to check. But if you'll have me, I want to try with you, from the ground up." Kelly exhaled slow and long, like she'd been holding her breath since the day they met. Then she stepped aside and said simply, "Come in." Later that night, as they sat on the floor eating takeout straight from the boxes, she asked softly, "What did you tell her?" Mark looked over at her. "I told her she looked happy without me, and that we should keep it that way." Kelly smiled. "That's cold." "No," Mark said, setting down his fork. "That's peace." She leaned against his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head. For the first time in a long time, Mark didn't feel like a man trying to hold on to something broken. He felt like someone finally willing to build something real. The apartment no longer echoed with ghosts or half-finished conversations. It hummed with possibility, with the quiet knowledge that he'd made a choice, not out of desperation or rebound, but out of genuine desire to move forward. The divorce papers were filed. Kelly was here, and Mark was at last free.
The courtroom felt colder than it should have, not physically, but emotionally, like every inch of the space had been drained of color and replaced with beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, and voices that spoke in legal code instead of truth. Lisa sat across from Mark at the plaintiff's table, wearing a cream blazer and the kind of lipstick that looked expensive and calculated. She glanced at him just once, and in that glance Mark saw the entire performance load into place, tears waiting behind her lashes, the fragile ex-wife, the abandoned soul, the act. When the judge entered, Lisa adjusted her posture like she'd rehearsed this moment in a mirror. The first few minutes passed in formalities, documents, statements, stipulations. But then Lisa's attorney stood, voice crisp. "Your Honor, my client contends that Mr. Keene's emotional withdrawal and sudden replacement of the marital home environment created severe distress. She seeks equitable relief based on abandonment." Mark didn't react. Neither did Kelly, seated 3 rows back with hair pulled up, eyes fixed forward like steel in a storm. Mark's lawyer nodded at him, then stood. "Your Honor, with your permission, we'd like to enter new material into evidence." He handed over a folder containing printed emails, flight records, screenshots, tagged photos, every cocktail, every sunset lie, every step of Lisa's break logged and timestamped. But the final page was the anchor, a printed message thread between Lisa and a friend where she laughed about Gavin's yacht, mocked Mark's Netflix queue, and bragged about how long she could keep him just waiting. The judge read silently, his expression shifting barely, but Mark caught it. When he looked back up, the room was different. "Mrs. Keene," he said flatly, "are you prepared to respond to these documents?" Lisa's lips parted, then pressed together. She glanced around as if the right words were scattered somewhere in the air, but there were none, because truth has a sound, and this room had just heard it. The judge adjusted his glasses. Petition for divorce granted. Property and account division per the revised agreement. Court adjourned. The gavel cracked. Lisa stood stunned, her eyes darting toward Mark, begging for something, anything, an opening. He gave her nothing. As Mark walked out, Kelly stood and followed. Outside the courthouse, the wind tugged at her coat. She pulled it tighter, then looked up at him quietly. "Was it enough?" she asked. "No," Mark said. She tilted her head. "It was everything." They went back to their apartment, poured 2 glasses of wine, sat on the couch that had seen both of their worst nights. Lisa's name never came up again, but later when she pounded on the front door screaming something muffled and wild through the hallway, Mark didn't answer. He just picked up the phone and dialed the police. When he hung up, Kelly clinked her glass against his. "To the truth," she said.
to what's next," Mark replied. And in that moment, Mark finally understood what it meant to be free. Not from someone, but from the weight of who he used to be. The apartment felt lighter, the future felt open, and the woman beside him felt real. Lisa's performance had ended, the curtain had fallen, and Mark had walked out of the theater entirely, ready to write a story that was finally, completely his own.